Today's daf is Masechta Bava Metzia Daf Kuf Yud Aleph Amid Kuf Yud Aleph. We're going to begin from the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Yud Amid Beis. Okay, so here we're discussing the main idea over here is paying wages on time. So the Mishnah, first of all, let's just bring up the psukim so I don't have to bring up the psukim anymore. You can see on your screen, it says, the Torah tells us, Loi Sas Shoik, that's Loi Shas Shoik, Es Riachav, Loi Sigzo, Loi Solom Pulas Sachir Ad Boike. Don't defraud your fellow Israelite, which means that if he Loi Sas Shoik, well, how do you defraud him? He worked for you and you're not paying him. That's the bottom line. The Loi Sigzo, don't steal from him. That's also similar. You could steal from somebody when he actually worked for you. This is not besides it means don't steal from somebody, don't mug somebody, forcibly steal from somebody. But if the guy worked for you and you're not paying him, it's also you're stealing from him. And then the Torah says, if you owe him money, you can't keep the wages with you until the morning. You have to pay him at night. That's what it means. Don't let it overnight. You pay him right away. Then the Torah says, if a poor person worked for you, don't hold back the wages. And that's also the day he worked for you, you have to give him the wages. Don't let the sun set, you didn't pay him. He's a poor guy that worked for you, and he's relying on you to pay him. And let him not pray to God that and have a complaint against you, then you will Hashem will consider a big avera and you'll get punished right away because you're causing somebody pain. That's the main psukim that we're going to deal with in this sugya. So the Mishnah says, First, the Mishnah starts off with another idea. If someone accepted from his friend to pay 1 7-year cycle to use his land, and he said he wants to pay 700 zuz, right? So presumably you mean 100 per each year. But Shemitah, you're not allowed to work the field. The Mishnah says Hashvias min haminyan. The Shemitah year is considered part of the arrangement, and therefore you can't deduct and say, "Oh, I didn't mean the Shemitah year." Yes, you meant the Shemitah year. You're paying for 700, although you're going to only be able to use the field for 6 years. But if you change the arrangement and said Kible Menu, if you accepted from him Sheva Shanim B'Shva Me'azus, if you said I want to use the land for 7 years for 700 zuz, so you said I want to use the land for 7 years, Ein Shvius Min Haminyan, then Shemitah is not counted because you can't use the land during Shemitah. It's free for everybody. Okay, now we're in the Mishnah. Hi. Lewis, we just began. We're on the Mishnah Kuf Yud Amid Beis, and a new topic, and this is the topic that will take us the rest of the page. Kuf Yud Amid Beis 110b. Schir Yoim Goive Kol Alayv. Someone worked for you during the day, so then you have to pay him that night, right? So he finished working at 5 o'clock. You have the whole night to pay him until sunrise. Schir Laila, but if he worked for you at night, Goive Kol Yoim, then he has the whole day till sunset for you to pay him. Schir sha'os, let's say he worked for you for a couple of hours. Let's say he worked for you from 8 o'clock in the morning till 11 o'clock in the morning. Goiva kol halayla v'chol hayoyim. The Mishnah says, I'm sorry, schir sha'os goiva kol halayla v'chol hayoyim. So he can collect the entire night and the entire day. We don't know what this means. If he worked for a couple of hours, you have the entire night to pay him or the entire day. We'll figure that out in the Gemara. Schir Shabbos is if you made a commitment for a guy to work for you for an entire week. Schir Chodesh, he worked for you for an entire month. Schir Shchana, if he works, the agreement was he works for you for an entire year. Schir Shavua, or the agreement was that he works for you for a 7-year cycle. So the Mishnah says Yotza Bayoim Goiva Kol Hayoim. If he finished during the daytime, then you have to pay him the whole day. In other words, let's say he finished working at 5 o'clock. And 8:30 is sunset, you have only 3 hours to pay him. Yotza Balayla, if he finished working at night, Goiva Kol Halayla, by the end of the night, you have to either you have the entire night and the entire V'chol Hayom, the entire next day, because when it comes to paying wages, the day follows the night, like in Jewish law. We'll see more about this in the Gemara. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught. Minayin, how do I know? L'schir yoin, if someone worked for you for the entire day, that you have to pay him by that night. Shegoiva kol halayla, that you have to pay him the entire night. Shenema, the pasuk says, Loi solin pula sochir idcha ad. Don't overnight his wages, that it should be with you till the next morning. So it's presumably a guy worked for you during the daytime. You're supposed to pay him sometime during the night, and you're not allowed to have those wages in your possession by sunrise the next morning. And that umanayin, how do you know l'schir laila shegoiva kol hayom? And how about if someone finishes working at night, that he has the entire next day to collect? So you, if he finishes working for you at 3 o'clock in the morning, you have until the next day sunset to pay him. Shenama, because the pasuk says, the day he works for you, you give him his wages, and the day follows the night. So therefore, you have until the next day sunset to pay him. So the Gemara asks the question, maybe I'll say the opposite. If a guy works for you during the daytime, you have to be you have to pay him that day. In other words, if he finishes working at 5 o'clock, you have until 8:30 p.m. till sunset to pay him. And if a guy works for you at night, you have to pay him at night. If he finishes at 3 in the morning, you have to pay him by 4 in the morning. So the Gemara says, no. Since the entire, you owe him on when he finishes his job. So when he finishes his job, you have the whole day. That's when you are obligated to pay. So the grace period from the employer to pay the employee is the next 12-hour period, the next oina, which means that if he finishes during the day, you have a whole 12 hours to pay him. In other words, you have the whole night time to figure out to pay him. And if he finishes working at night, so then you have, so at the end of his term at night, that's when you're obligated to pay him. So the grace period is the next day. Tana Rabbana, the rabbis taught, from the pasuk that says, don't overnight wages with you. Don't let you sleep and the wages are with you. You're not allowed to keep it till morning. If the Torah tells you don't overnight it, of course it means until the morning. This is a very important concept. Let's say he worked for you during the daytime, so you have the whole night to pay him. Let's say you didn't pay him the first night. Do you get an avera every single night? The answer is no. It's a one-time avera. The first night that passed and you didn't pay him, you get this avera. Mikan ve'elech mai. What happens the next few days if you didn't pay him? Amarav oiver mishum baltasha. Your oiver in Isra Rabbanim called do not delay payment. Amar Rav Yosef. What's Rav Yosef explained? My kra'ah. What's the pasuk that says do not delay payment? So the Torah says, the Mishlei says, Al don't tell your friend who you owe money because he worked for you. Lech, go home, v'shuv, and come back tomorrow. U'mocher etein, and I'll pay you tomorrow. V'yesh itcha, but you could pay him today. So that's if you worked for somebody and you experience that, let's say a guy owes you a commission or something like that, it's very hard to accept that he can't pay you today. I'll have to pay you tomorrow. You worked for it. You're waiting for it. So therefore, there's an avera, even the Rabbanim, to delay it beyond the first day. Tana Rabbanim, the rabbis taught. Here's an exemption. If someone tells his friend, say if the employer hired an HR guy to hire people, so then there is no Isser Baltolin. Because the Torah only says if you hire the worker, you have to pay him. But if you had a messenger hire the worker, then there's no Aveira Baltolin. Zeh Lefi Shloi Sachran. The Shliach, the owner, he didn't do the hiring. The employer didn't do the hiring. We go to Kuf Yud Aleph and Aleph. V'zeh, and the Shliach, Lefi Shloi Ein Pulasei Etzlei. He doesn't have to pay the wages. He's just acting as an HR person, hiring the people, but it's not his responsibility to pay the wages. And the Gemara explains right away. Hey Chidami. If he said, I'm going to pay you, if the Shliach said, I'm going to pay you schare olavu, then the HR person, the shliach, has to pay. If he said, I'm going to pay you, if he said to the workers, I'm the one responsible for paying you, then he has to pay it. The Tanya we learned in the Brisa, if you hire a worker and you make a trick with him, you tell him, I'm hiring you to work in my field, and the worker agrees. And then you showed him, oh, go work in that field, which really belongs to your friend. So who is responsible for paying him? He didn't work in your field, he worked in your friend's field. So the answer is, but you hired him. You have to pay 100% wages to him. Then you collect from the owner of that field that he benefited from the workers working on his field. So again, if the shliach said, I'm going to pay you, so certainly he will be over by Laisalim. And says the Gemara, I don't need it. The shliach said that the owner is going to pay you. I'm just acting as a messenger. In that case, there is no loisa'olin. So this is like a bypass some way of the Torah telling you that there's ways that you can bypass the avera of loisa'olin, of actually having to pay the workers exactly on time. Yehuda bar Merema was very afraid to be over the avera of loisalim, and therefore he wanted to pay people that he hired right on time. So he wanted to get around this avera because he was afraid that maybe he's not going to remember to pay, or he's going to be busy. So he told his attendant, Zil Ageli Pa'alim, go hire me workers, the Emaluhu, and tell them that I'll pay them. By doing so, Yehuda bar Merema avoided the problem, if it should ever be, that he won't be over the avera of loisalim. Merema Marzutra, when they wanted to hire people, they would send each other to do the hiring. So Merema would hire on behalf of Marzutra, and Marzutra would hire on behalf of Merema in order to get around this avera of loisalim. It's a big avera. If you hire somebody and you're the one that's doing the hiring, it's a big avera that the day that he finishes his work, you have to pay him. Amar Rabba bar Rav Huna said, there are certain workers that work for people who don't have cash. You know, when the employee takes the position, he knows the employer will not have money until the market day. So it's almost as if they're committed to say, oh, you don't have to pay me right away when I finish the job. I know you're going to pay me when the market day comes, and then you'll have the money. Made the yade, because the workers know that the employer is relying on the day that he goes to the market, so he will have a cash flow. So therefore, on the day of the market, he has to then they know they're going to get paid. But there's no isra of loisolin, because loisolin is only the first night, the night after they finish their job. If the day of the market passes and the employer did not, is still holding on to the money and didn't pay the employee, then he does get an avera of baltasha, and isur d'rabbanan. Schir shoyis goyve kol halayla v'kol hayom. Amar Rav. Schir shoyis. The Rav's made a statement like this: a schir shoyis, a guy worked for you the yom. If he works for you a couple of hours during the day, let's assume from 8 in the morning to 11 in the morning, goyve kol hayom, then you have to pay him that day. Schir shoyis the layla. If he worked for you at night, let's say from 9 p.m. till 12 p.m., goyve kol halayla, you have to pay him that night. Shmuel says schir shoyis the yom goyve kol hayom. I agree with that. Schir shoyis the layla, but if he worked for you at night, then goyve kol halayla v'kol hayom. Then you can pay him the entire night and the entire day. So really, if he worked for you from 9 to 11 at night, so then you have the entire night and the next day till sunset to pay him. So now we learned in the Mishnah, schir shoyis. The Mishnah says schir shoyis goyve kol halayla v'kol hayom to yufta derav. It says a guy worked for you during the daytime, and so you have a right to pay him the entire night and the next day. So tiyufta derav. The Rav said, and it's certainly tiyufta d'Shmuel also. Schir shoyis the yom goyve kol hayom. He says that if you finished working during the day, you could only pay him that day, not at night. Answers the Gemara, Amalach Rav litzadin ketani. The Mishnah has to be read in separate events. Schir shoyis the yom. If he worked for you during the day, goyve kol hayom, then you have to pay him that day. Schir shoyis the layla. If he worked for you for a couple of hours at night, goyve kol halayla, then then he has the entire night to collect. So it's not goy v'kol halayla v'kol hayom by the same person. It depends when the hours occurred. If it occurred during the day, you have to pay him that day. If it occurred that night, you pay him that night. Tonight we learned in the Mishnah, Hoyas Chir Shabbos, Chir Chodesh, Chir Shodesh, Chir Shavua. So if he had an extended contract with you, right? Let's say he was going to work for an entire month, and he worked for an entire month, and then you're supposed to pay him. Yoytze b'yom, when the job ends during the daytime, goy v'kol hayom, that day you have to pay him. Yoytze b'layla, if it ends at night, goy v'kol halayla v'chol hayom. So then you have the entire night to pay him. Let's say he worked for an entire month, and the term ended at 11 o'clock at night on the 30th day. So then you have until the next day, sunset, to pay him. And that's not like Rav. Rav says that if something ends at night, you have to pay him that night. Amalach Rav says, you're right. Tanoi, and I align myself with another Tana. So it seems that Rav and Shmuel have the same argument as Tanoim. The Tanya we learned in a Brisa, Shiyashoyis the Yoim. If a guy worked for a couple of hours during the day, goy v'kol hayom. Shiyashoyis the Laila, goy v'kol halayla. If he worked for a couple of hours at night, he collect the entire night, which is exactly what Rav said. And that is the opinion of the Tana, Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Shimon says, Shchir shoyes the Yom goy v'kol hayom, Shchir shoyes the Laila goy v'kol halayla v'chol hayom. So there you have it. Rabbi Shimon aligned himself up with Shmuel. And so Rav and Shmuel have the same argument as Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Shimon. And it also depends who you paskin like. Do you paskin like Rav or do you paskin like Shmuel? We know in halacha, sometimes when it comes to dinim of Isser, of prohibition, we paskin like Rav. When it comes to money matters, we paskin like Shmuel. If holding back wages, is that a money matter or is that just a lav? Is that a kashrus question? And that will depend. If you answer that question, then you can figure out, are you going to paskin like Rav or Shmuel? Anyway, the Gemara is now going to go take a turn and tell you how severe it is to hold back somebody's wages. You get 5 averas. Bal tashik esriacho, mishum bal digzo, bal tashik schar ani, bal tolim, mishum b'yom etit schari, which is the asay, mishum doleitove olav hashamish. So there's like a couple of averas repeated in the Torah. And the Gemara says, "Hani diika b'yoma leka b'layla, diika b'layla leka b'yoma." The Gemara understood that one person could be over all these 5 averas, but that's not true because the pasuk is speaking of different events. If he worked for you during the day, you have the entire night. If you work for you in the night, you have the entire day. So certain lavim apply one way and doesn't apply the other way. So it's not like you're going to do one avera, you're going to get 5 lavim. Same schiris ba'alma. It's just giving you the strictness of hiring people that there are 5 lavim, but it's not one person doing one avera is going to get all 5 lavin. Now, the Torah, if you notice, said, Bal tashik es riacho mishum bal tigzol. Here, I have it over here. The first thing, one of the things, loisashik es riacha, don't defraud your friend, means holding back wages, and don't steal from him. Presumably, you're stealing from him by not paying him. So the Gemara is now questioning, what's the difference between loisashik and loisigzol? That's the question. Ezehu oishik ve'ezehu gezel. What's considered oishik and what's considered gezel? Amar Chizda leich v'shuv zehu oishik. If he says come back, he says then he knows he wants to pay you. He just says come back tomorrow. That's called oishik. But if he says yesh lecha b'yadi, I know I owe you the money, ve'ini noisin lecha, I'm not giving it to you. Zehu gezel. That's stealing. So that's the difference between the 2 averos. Maskiv l'rav sheishes. But Ezul Oishek Shechiva Lev Tarav Carbon. The Torah says that sometimes if you do this Avera and you do the Oishek Avera, you have to bring a carbon Shavua. If you swore falsely, you have to bring a carbon Shavua. And the Torah juxtaposes the Oishek Avera to the Avera of Pikadon, when somebody denies that he received the deposit, that he's safekeeping something for somebody else. The Kakafalei Mamoina. That you're totally denying it. So oishik means a total denial. But the Rav Chizda learned that the word oishik means that the employer agrees that he owes the money. He's just saying, I don't want to pay today, I want to pay next week. Ella Omar Rav Sheshes explained, Nesativlach, if you tell the employee, I already paid you, so you're denying any owing of money, Zehu oishik. That's called oishik. But you say, I know I owe you the money, but I ain't giving it to you. That's gezel. So that he agreed to Rav Chizda. Maskif lo Abayas. Abaya asked the question, Exu gezel shchiva of taiva carbon. Well, the Torah says that sometimes if someone steals and makes a shvua, he'll have to bring a carbon when he wants to do tshuva. And the word, it's that in that pasuk is dum yid pikodim be'inim. It's juxtaposed next to the word pikodim, the kakafalei mamoina, and by safekeeping means you made a total denial. So gezel also means you make it a total denial. So lois sashait means you're denying owing, and gezel means also you deny owing it. So Elam Abai explained that the lois chartichim oilam. If you tell a guy, an employee, I never hired you, zehu oishik. That's called oishik. Nisativ lach. But if you tell him, I paid you already, zehu gezel. That is called gezel. Rav Sheshes, the Gemara asks one question. Rav Sheshes, Maishno Oishik the Kashale, Maishno Gezel like Kashale. Amalach Gezel the Gazli Bahad the Kafre. Yachi Afil Oishik Nam the Had the Kafre. Achi Ashik Bishlam Awesome Ksiv Oy Begazim Bichlil Oydel Mikar. Abag Oishik Miksiv Oy Oishik. The Gemara just went through an exercise over here of Rav Sheshes' opinion, the middle opinion, that if you say Misativ Loch, that's called Oishik, right? So you admit it. You admit that I gave it to you. And yesh lecha b'yadi ve'eni noiselach zehu gezel. I know I owe you, but I'm not giving you to. That's gezel. So how does that work? Why is it gezel? You're admitting to something, and by oishik you're not admitting to anything, because by gezel you actually denying it at first, but then you admit it. Oishik means that you totally deny it from the very beginning. In other words, when the employee comes to you and says, pay me, and you say, I gave it to you, that's a real total denial. And that's how Rav Sheshes learned these psukim over here, loy sashik and loy sigzal. Let's just go further. Rava Amma, zehu oishik, zehu gezel. They both mean the same thing. Employee comes to you and you don't pay him on time, that's oishik and gezel. Why did the Torah say two separate lavim? You do something like that, you get two lavim. Simple as that. So the Mishnah. I just want to start the Mishnah, and we'll learn for another 2-3 minutes here. We talked about not paying a worker on time, right? What happens? You don't pay a rental fee on time. Whether you hired a human being to work for you. Let's say you rented an animal to work for you. Or you rented a car. The day you rented it and you finished using it, you have to pay the rental fee. When do you are required to pay these rental fees? As long when the guy who you rented it from is asking for payment, then you have a whole 12-hour period to come up with the money. But if he didn't pay, if he didn't make a claim against you, then you don't get the avera, because it's just a rental fee. So then you have more time, and you're not going to be over the lav of loy solim. So that's a big chiddush over the Mishnah. Mishnah says you go to your friend, you rent an animal from him, or you rent his car. If he wants the money as soon as you finish with the rental, so then you have to pay him. And if you don't pay him, the Mishnah says you're getting the avera of loy tolim. Now, let's say a worker worked for you, and he said, the worker needed fruits. So what the employer said, okay, go to the shopkeeper or go to the banker and let them pay you fruits, or let them give you the money. And so then he transferred the responsibility to pay to the shopkeeper or to the banker. So then he doesn't get the avera if the banker or the shopkeeper delays paying the worker. A guy, an employee, and he has a right to make a claim, and he says, I didn't get paid, during the first 12-hour period, he could swear and v'noitel. So in other words, let's say the worker says he was supposed to get paid, and it's during that period that he's supposed to get paid. He goes over to the employer, and the employee says, I paid you, and the employee says, I didn't get paid. We believe if the employee swears, and then he said he could collect. Overs money, but let's say the time passed, and the employer said, I paid you, so then the employee we won't believe him. He doesn't swear and take. If he had Adam that he said to the Adam, hey, my employer never paid me, then we will ask him to take a shvua, and then he can get paid. Ger Toishav, a goy who, a ger Toishav, yesh by mishum biyoymai titin schorai, The ein boy mishum loy talim pulas schar itcha ad boiker, and we're going to stop over here. A ger toishav. A ger toishav is a goy and a good guy. In other words, he's mekayim the 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach. So let's say he works for you. Are you required to pay him right away? So the Mishnah holds yesh boy mishum b'yoy ma'titin scharai. You have to pay him that day, but the ein boy mishum loy talim pulas itcha ad boiker. That means that if he worked for you during the day, then you don't have to pay him that night. If he worked for you at night, then you have to pay him right away the next day. So it's a very interesting differentiation. Again, a ger toishav, a goy who keeps 7 mitzvahs b'nei Noach, if he worked for you at night, you have to pay him the next day, like a regular Jew. If he worked for you during the daytime, then you don't have to pay him the next night. There's no avera. And we have to know, why is there a difference? Okay, we'll stop right over here.
Okay, thank you.